What's going on, everybody? So we're going to be going through the Senate floor today. We're on a little bit of a delay. We can jump around like we want to and do whatever we want. It's, there's no rules. I don't know. Are there rules? We're not going to be breaking any of YouTube's rules here. We're going to be jumping, I think the first, Schumer was first. I don't want to. Do we need to go back to Schumer and hear what he has to say?
And last December saw the highest daily and monthly numbers ever recorded. In the 2 months since the House impeached Secretary Mayorkas, the border crisis has only continued, with excruciating consequences for innocent Americans. On February 22nd, an illegal alien was arrested in Virginia for sexually assaulting a minor. The very next day, another illegal alien from Venezuela was arrested for the murder of Laken Riley, a young college student in Georgia. In the same month, yet another was charged with first and second degree murder for the shooting of a 2-year-old in Maryland. And for the Americans living right near the border, things are not improving. In February, one man working in Arizona recounted watching cartel guides lead over 170 people from around the world through one such opening in a matter of hours. The House managers will make the case for Secretary Mayorkas' role in neglecting and exacerbating that crisis. And as befits such a solemn and rare responsibility as convening a court of impeachment, I intend to give these charges my full and undivided attention. Of course, that would require that senators actually get the opportunity to hold a trial. And this is exactly what history and precedent dictate. Never before has the Senate agreed to a motion to table articles of impeachment, not for an officer of either party, not once. Instead, every single time that we've been called upon to render judgment, we've done so. We've convened a trial, or in accordance with Rule 11 of the impeachment rules agreed to in 1935, we've appointed a trial committee to dig into the facts and make a recommendation.
What's going on, everybody?
It would be beneath the Senate's dignity to shrug off our clear responsibility and fail to give the charges we'll hear today the thorough consideration.
This is Mitch at 1.5 speed. You're welcome.
I'll strenuously oppose any effort to table the articles of impeachment and avoid looking the Biden administration's border crisis squarely in the face. Now, on an entirely different matter, 2 months ago, the Senate passed a national security supplemental that reflected the clear links between the challenges we face.
Sorry for blowing your ears out.
Adversaries from Beijing to Pyongyang and Moscow to Tehran, actually all working together.
Trying to get Mozart.
They're reinforcing one another's efforts to sap our resolve, shatter our influence, and
very sorry about that.
Of the road on their own terms. And anyone pretending that we can address these challenges individually at our leisure is only kidding themselves. As I've said before, this isn't a matter of philosophical differences. The truth is plainly evident. If you want to see the world the way our adversaries do, trace the trade of Chinese cash for sanctioned Iran energy. Watch the trainloads of North Korean artillery arrive at the front lines of Putin's onslaught in Ukraine. Follow the flows of drones to the Russian military.
He's having a rough time.
They're the same ones that Iran launched.
And we should skip because we have the ability to skip around here. We should take that. Here we go. Senator Thune, South Dakota. Handsome devil. Where'd he go? You were just there, Senator.
That we use to keep
Senator
our country
Cornyn.
safe from adversaries overseas. Congress enacted Section 702 in 2008 in response to the threats posed by terrorist groups in the wake of 9/11. It tore down some of the walls that prevented the sharing of information that could be used to keep our country safe, and there's no question that it's been a success. Information acquired through Section 702 has helped identify threats against U.S. troops.
We're talking about 702 again.
Planned terrorist attacks abroad and here at home. It's enabled the federal government to stop components of weapons of mass destruction from reaching foreign actors. It's also helped disrupt our adversaries' efforts to recruit spies on American soil and send their operatives to the United States.
I'm not a 702 fan,
Gaza.
so I'm not
As a matter of fact, 702
sit through him.
Note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
702
Mr. Marshall,
is a database
Mr. McConnell.
supposed to be used just for foreign intelligence collection, but if an American ends up in there, too bad. They can search it without a warrant, from what I understand. And if I'm wrong, chat, let me know. that Senator Thune is just too handsome for this world.
Mr. Heinrich, aye.
We got a roll call vote, voting action. All right. The action's coming up. And can you hear me, chat? Let me know. Right. After 2 o'clock, I think, is when the good stuff started to come in.
Of the Senate, I will read House Resolution 995.
Here we go.
Resolved that Mr. Green of Tennessee, Mr. McCall, Mr. Biggs, Mr. Higgins of Louisiana, Mr. Klein, Mr. Guest, Mr. Garbarino, Ms. Green of Georgia, Mr. Pfluger, Ms. Hageman, and Ms. Lee of Florida are appointed managers to conduct the impeachment trial against Alejandro Nicolas Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security, that a message be sent to the Senate to inform the Senate of these appointments,
from the House,
and that the managers so appointed may, in connection with the preparation and the conduct of the trial, exhibit the articles of impeachment to the Senate and take all necessary actions, which may include the following. 1, employing legal, clerical, and other necessary assistance, and incurring such other expenses as may be necessary to be paid from amounts available to the Committee on Homeland Security under applicable expense resolutions or for the applicable amounts of the House of Representatives. 2, sending for persons and papers and filing with the Secretary of the Senate on the part of the House of Representatives any pleadings in conjunction with or subsequent to the exhibition of the articles of impeachment that the managers consider necessary. With the permission of the Senate, I will now read the articles of impeachment. House Resolution 863. Resolved that Alejandro Nicolas Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security of the United States of America, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, and that the following articles of impeachment be exhibited to the United States Senate. Articles of impeachment exhibited by the House of Representatives of the United States of America in the name of itself and the people of the United States of America against Alejandro N. Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security of the United States of America, in maintenance and support of its impeachment against him for high crimes and misdemeanors. Article 1, willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives, quote, shall have the sole power of impeachment, end quote, and that civil officers of the United States, including the Secretary of Homeland Security, quote, shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, end quote. In his conduct while Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro N. Mayorkas, in violation of his oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and to well and faithfully discharge the duties of his office, has willfully and systemically refused to comply with the federal immigration laws in that. Throughout his tenure as Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro N. Mayorkas has repeatedly violated laws enacted by Congress regarding immigration and border security. In large part because of his unlawful conduct, millions of aliens have illegally entered the United States on an annual basis, with many unlawfully remaining in the United States. His refusal to obey the law is not only an offense against the separation of powers in the Constitution of the United States, it also threatens our national security and has had a dire impact on communities across the country. Despite clear evidence that his willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law has significantly contributed to unprecedented levels of illegal immigrants entrance, the increased control of the southwest border by drug cartels, and the imposition of enormous costs on states and localities affected by the influx of aliens, Alejandro N. Mayorkas has continued in his refusal to comply with the law and thereby acted to the grave detriment of the interests of the United States. Alejandro N. Mayorkas engaged in this scheme or course of conduct through the following means. 1, Alejandro N. Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 235B2A of the Immigration and Nationality Act, requiring that all applicants for admission who are, quote, not clearly and beyond a doubt entitled to be admitted shall be detained for a removal proceeding, end quote. Instead of complying with this requirement, Alejandro N. Mayorkas implemented a catch-and-release scheme whereby such aliens were unlawfully released, even without effective mechanisms to ensure appearance before the immigration courts for removal proceedings, or to ensure removal in the case of aliens ordered removed. 2. Alejandro Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 235B1B2 of such act, requiring that an alien who is placed into expedited removal proceedings and determined to have a credible fear of persecution, quote, shall be detained for further consideration of the application for asylum, end quote. Instead of complying with this requirement, Alejandro Mayorkas implemented a catch-and-release scheme whereby such aliens were unlawfully released, even without effective mechanisms to ensure appearances before the immigration courts for removal proceedings, or to ensure removal in the case of aliens ordered removed. 3. Alejandro Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention set forth in Section 235B1B3(4) of such act, requiring that an alien who is placed into expedited removal proceedings and determined not to have a credible fear of persecution, quote, shall be detained until removed, end quote. Instead of complying with this requirement, Alejandro Mayorkas has implemented a catch-and-release scheme whereby such aliens are unlawfully released, even without effective mechanisms to ensure appearance before the immigration courts for removal proceedings, or to ensure removal in the case of aliens ordered removed. 4. Alejandro Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 236C of such act, requiring that a criminal alien who is inadmissible or deportable on certain criminal and terrorism-related grounds, quote, shall be taken into custody, end quote, when the alien is released from law enforcement custody. Instead of complying with this requirement, Alejandro Mayorkas issued, quote, guidelines for the enforcement of civil immigration laws, end quote, which instructs Department of Homeland Security, hereinafter referred to as DHS, officials that the, quote, fact an individual is a removable non-citizen should not alone be the basis of an enforcement action against them, end quote. And that DHS, quote, personnel should not rely on the fact of conviction alone, end quote, even with respect to aliens subject to mandatory arrest and detention pursuant to Section 236C of such act, to take them into custody. In Texas versus the United States, 40 F 4th 205, 2022,
young Tommy Lee Jones.
The United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit concluded that these guidelines had, quote, every indication of being a general policy that is so extreme as to amount to an abdication of statutory responsibility, end quote. And that is, quote, replacement of Congress's statutory mandates with concerns of equity and race is extra-legal and plainly outside the bounds of the power conferred by the INA, end quote. Number 5, Alejandro Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 241A2 of such act, requiring that an alien ordered removed, quote, shall be detained, quote, during, quote, the removal period, end quote. Instead of complying with this mandate, Alejandro Mayorkas issued, quote, guidelines for the enforcement of civil immigration laws, end quote, which instructs DHS officials that the, quote, fact an individual is removable non-citizen should not alone be the basis of an enforcement action against them, end quote, and that DHS, quote, personnel should not rely on the fact of conviction alone, end quote, even with respect to aliens subject to mandatory detention and removal pursuant to Section 241A of such act. 6, Alejandro Mayorkas willfully exceeded his parole authority set forth in Section 212D5A of such act that permits parole to be granted, quote, only on a case-by-case basis, end quote, temporarily and, quote, for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit, end quote, in that, A, Alejandro Mayorkas paroled aliens en masse in order to release them from mandatory detention, despite the fact that, as the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit concluded in Texas versus Biden, 20 F 4th 928, 2021,
losing
quote,
everybody.
Paroling
I don't
every
blame
alien
them either.
DHS cannot detain is the opposite of the case-by-case basis determinations
let's get
required by
back.
law. End quote. End
all
quote.
this
DHS's
positive energy
pretended
together.
power to parole aliens while ignoring the limitations
we
Congress
get it.
imposed on the parole
These are
power
the,
is not
House
non-enforcement.
managers of the
It's
impeachment
misenforcement,
bringing
suspension of the INA,
the
or
information they
both.
brought from the House
B.
to the Senate.
Alejandro and Mayorkas created, reopened, or
But I think
expanded
we need the,
a series of categories.
who are those people
Mayorkas
that
also
put the,
justice and made false
asses in the seats, as
in
they
as
say.
jurors tomorrow
Oh,
at 1
boy.
p.m.
Let's hear what this guy has to say. I want to know what his excuses are going to be.
The majority leader's
The information of all senators under impeachment rules, senators will be sworn in as jurors tomorrow at 1 p.m., and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
I mean, if he goes with it, that's great. If he blocks it, that's not great. How you like my analysis? That's what you're here for. No, just kidding. If they impeach, it's good. If they go
provide the
choose not to,
military and
that's not
economic
good.
support to help Ukraine win and define victory on its own terms.
Who's this?
We must
She
Speaker
looks
Johnson
like any guesses?
have delayed
I don't actually know who
Indo-Pacific,
this is.
and
Shaheen,
importantly,
New
for our
Hampshire.
own national security needs here at home. Over the past 6 months, I've worked with senators from both sides of the aisle.
Anybody
to
care?
urge passage
Chat,
of
let me
supplemental
know.
funding to support our national security.
Gonna skip.
And I am beyond disappointed that Speaker Johnson and House Republicans have delayed much needed critical aid, especially given the Senate bill that passed here with 70 bipartisan
Where are we
votes.
talking about?
I believe, and my colleagues
to
on both
where?
sides of the aisle believe, that that would pass the House
Is she
if only
talking
the
about the
Speaker would
Ukraine?
bring the bill to the floor. Now, we hear this week that House Republicans may be nearing a vote on this aid.
Jesus, she's
And
talking about
while I'm
Ukraine.
encouraged by that, it is way past time for us to help the courageous Ukrainians
Oh my
who are
God.
fighting literally for the life of their country.
That's insane.
Chair of the European Subcommittee of the Foreign Relations Committee.
We're talking about
Like so
impeachment,
many in this
lady,
chamber,
about the southern
I've
border
met with
here in
President
America,
Zelensky,
and the
traveled to
terrorists that
Ukraine,
are probably
met
here
with
right
women
now.
and men
Probably
who are on
here.
the front lines of this
They're
war.
here.
I know the dire state of affairs
Sleeper
right now.
cells,
We're
yeah.
in the middle.
Oh my God, New Hampshire
America
people.
does-
Being
Who
fueled
are
by the
you
inflation
sending
created,
in?
FEMA introduced risk rating
What do
to
we got?
safety
Who do we
net
got?
for inflation.
I gotta do okay. Bill Cassidy,
You see people getting on
Louisiana.
a bus wearing waders. So people's lives were disrupted, just like any serious flood. So now families are turning to FEMA, the National Flood Insurance Program, to help lift them out of the hole that last week's storms have left them in. And moments of this are why people buy insurance. But what about after we've recovered and the
I mean,
sun
he's
shines
doing
once more?
what the people
There's
sent
increasing
him there to
concern among
do.
Americans that they will not be able to afford their flood insurance for when the next storm hits. A house is the biggest purchase most people make in their lifetime. Unless you're among the wealthiest, you are taking out a mortgage to make that purchase. After you've bought your home, imagine if FEMA
affects
changes
where
the
I live
rules
too, so I'm
and your
gonna
flood
listen.
insurance now costs more than that mortgage. No American should have to pay more in flood insurance than their mortgage. But this is a story I am hearing frequently from people in Louisiana. There's a cost of living crisis being fueled by the inflation created by this administration. Inflation is costing Louisiana families $884 more a month compared to
Understood,
2020 of
Senator.
what they expect Americans to pay.
Oh, boy.
But we do.
He's still going.
Thank you.
There we go.
Willful,
We gotta
not
hear.
for representative.
Senator Kennedy is my spirit animal. So, come on, everybody, come back, come back. We got Senator Kennedy.
And I want my
Oh, I
colleague.
don't wanna. I
Mr.
gotta.
Colleague,
Here we go.
Without objection.
Thank you,
Come
Mr. President.
on.
Mr. President, with me today are one of my colleagues from the office, Mr. Matt Turner. I want to talk about the woolly mammoth in the room.
He loves saying
Impeachment.
that.
And I want my colleagues to just put aside for a second the legal aspect of this. Just stop thinking for a second about how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pen. And let's just think for a moment what's about to happen over the next 2 days. A few moments ago, the managers from the United States House of Representatives came over. Every member of the Senate was here and seated and read their articles of impeachment,
We heard that together.
their charges about Secretary Mayorkas. The United States House of Representatives, did you notice I said that? Representatives of the United States House of Representatives came over to us. As I said the other day, we're not talking about some snow bro who likes chicken McNuggets and weed and has an opinion. We're not talking about some game boy who's living in his parents' basement and has an opinion. Though both of them are entitled to their opinion, but this is America because
I
this
know
is
people
America.
like that,
We're talking about the United States House of Representatives.
and they are entitled to an opinion.
For months, they investigated the open, bleeding wound that is the southern border.
and why it is open and why it is bleeding. And after investigating it, not for days, not for weeks, for months, the United States House of Representatives voted 2 articles, 2 charges in an impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas. And those are serious charges. They're as serious as 4 heart attacks and a stroke. The first one is willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law, not negligence. Willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law. The second charge is breach of the public trust. Breach of the public trust. Serious, serious charges. Now, this doesn't happen every day or every week or every month or even every year around here. Our country's almost 250 years old.
20-something times.
This has only happened 22 times. 22 times has the United States House of Representatives impeached a public official. And every single time, check it, go Google it. Every single time. You can write this down, take it home to mama. Every single time, except when the public official has quit, the United States Senate has done its job through thick and thin. Whether the Democrats were in the majority or the Republicans were in the majority. Didn't matter who the president was. We did our job because we respect the institution of the Constitution. We respect the 3 branches of government. We respect the United States House of Representatives. We respect them enough to do our job. We held a trial every single time, except when the public official quit. Now, in the next 2 days, you're going to hear one of my colleagues, the majority leader, say we don't need to hold a trial. He's going to say the evidence is insufficient. It's not worth our time.
Schumer.
I want you to think for a moment. Just ask yourself this question. How does he know the evidence isn't sufficient?
Good point.
How does he know? He hadn't heard the evidence. What you're about to see, folks, it breaks my heart to say this. Over the next 2 days, what you're going to see is not about the evidence. It's not about the law. It's not about the process. It's not about, but should be, 250 years of precedent in history. It's about raw gut politics.
Yep.
Raw gut politics.
We'll see.
Some of my colleagues
God,
in this
I hope
body
they
do not want us to talk about the border in an election year. And we all know that. You know that. I know that. Everybody watching knows that. The American people know that. They may be poorer under President Biden, but they're not stupid. They can see that. And that's not right. It is fatuous. It is fraudulent. Regardless of what you think, or you may think without having heard the evidence, the United States Senate should do its job. We should hold a trial. Now, my Democratic friends have the votes. They can do pretty much what they want to. Okay? They can make when you've got the votes, you know, you can, what's the old expression? You can make a koala bear eat hot peppers and like it if you got the votes. They got the majority, and I believe in the rule of law, and the rules are the rules. But sometimes the majority just means that all of the fools are on the same side. That's why we have a Bill of Rights in our Constitution, to protect our rights that the majority can't take away. And I want to say this as respectfully as I can, because I understand politics. I've been in this business for a while. You have too, Mr. President. I've seen the dark side of it too. I've seen the good side, but I've seen the dark side of it. And what I'm seeing right now is the dark side. I'm seeing the dark side. This is a political decision. And it's an insult to the Senate. And it's one more step of the United States Senate
button would help
rotting from within,
subscribe,
where we don't do our job for political reasons. So I'm asking my Democratic colleagues, I say this gently, with as much respect as I can muster, pretty please, with sugar on top. Let's do our job. Just because you have the votes, don't dismiss these impeachment proceedings summarily, like it's spam in your inbox.
Pretty pleased
The United States
defense
Senate
argument.
needs to do its job.
That's desperate.
Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
How could you
Ms. Baldwin.
get them? How could you convince them to impeach Mayorkas? Because they're like they are hive-minded on that side. They vote lockstep. It's crazy. Just get one to break. You saw that guy? Was it Nebraska? It's a state senator who he broke with his party after his entire life.
Into a sea of despair.
His entire life being a Democrat, he has switched to a Republican, and he was just had nothing but good things to say.
Senator from Hawaii.
Party
Thank you,
left
Mr.
him,
President. I ask unanimous consent
and
to
now the
initiate the quorum
Republicans
call.
were
Without objection.
welcoming him with open
Mr.
arms
President,
and had some great
tens
talks
of
over the
millions
years.
of kids in America are anxious,
Brian
depressed,
Schatz. Brian
angry,
Schatz, Hawaii.
lonely, sedentary, sometimes insecure, sometimes
I'm
suicidal.
not into.
And just about everybody, whether they're parents or teachers or
Wow.
mental health professionals or even the kids
I mean,
themselves,
some of that stuff is heavy.
points the finger at the same culprit: social media. We do not need more data.
Well, okay.
here.
All right. Social
Decided
media.
that
Got it.
a
Okay.
couple of hours ago
Marsha
it was-
Blackburn. Let's check out what she has to say. Come on, chat. Where's our love for Marsha Blackburn? Everybody come back in. Come back. Everybody who left. If you didn't leave, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate everybody coming in anytime. Come out, come in, leave when you want. Though that like button is in a weird place in this vertical shorts
Senator from
kind of,
Tennessee.
not
Thank you,
shorts,
Mr.
live
President. I'll be
feed.
in a quorum call.
We are.
3
I ask
dots.
that we dispense with the quorum.
Without
Like-
objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.
subscribe.
We gathered just a couple of hours ago to
Also, if
receive
you
the
don't mind.
impeachment articles on Alejandro Mayorkas, who is the Secretary of Homeland Security. And how interesting that as we look at going through this impeachment, we have Senator Schumer, who's the majority leader, who has decided he wants to change his tune when it comes to dealing with impeachment. Now, in 2019, right before the Democrats started in on President Trump and an impeachment trial for President Trump, Leader Schumer stood right here in this chamber and he said, we have a responsibility to let all the facts come out. We have to remember our constitutional duty to act as judges and jurors in a potential trial. Now, those are his comments at that point in time. He was all for an impeachment trial, and it is our constitutional duty. You can look at Article 1, Sections 2 and Section 3. Section 2 lays out the responsibility of the House in impeachment. Section 3 pertains to the Senate and how we are to proceed with the trial of impeachment. But as I said, Leader Schumer has decided that he wants to change his tune, and all of a sudden, he is not wanting this, even though we actually have a public office holder who deserves to stand for impeachment trial, and that is Secretary Mayorkas. And now that it is the shoes on the other foot, if you will, and now that it is about a Democrat, then Leader Schumer wants to change the rules and say, no, he's even willing to take unprecedented actions that this chamber has never taken when it comes to the issue of impeachment. And I believe this should incense every single American.
Infuriating is what I was
I
going to
know
say.
it incenses the people of Tennessee. Because what we
Chat.
have learned in the last 3 years about Secretary Mayorkas, even though his title is the Secretary of Homeland Security, he does not believe in securing the homeland. And he has refused to fulfill his duty of securing the
emoji.
homeland. Now, I know that Secretary Mayorkas is doing the bidding of Joe Biden and the Biden administration. He's just doing what they tell him he's got to do. That, in and of itself, tells you a lot about what this administration thinks about the security and sovereignty of this country, and here is why. On the Biden-Mayorkas watch, you have more than 9.4 million illegal aliens coming into this country. That is in less
That's
than
the
3
ast number.
years.
Last
9.4
number I
million.
heard was 8
Now,
million. It's now
we
at
know
9.4.
that there's between 1.7 and 2.5 million gotaways. Some of those gotaways are included in that 9.4 million number, others are not, because they didn't see them as they were coming through and couldn't get to them, Mr. President. They found things they left on the roadside or in the woods, in the brush later on. Out of this 10 million or so that have illegally come in the country, and by the way, just to help everyone have the right context, that number of 10 million, that is greater than the population of 38 of our states. 38. That's how many people are coming in who are illegally entering the country. Now, out of this number,
What's phase
you've
2
got
gonna be?
thousands that are from countries
phase
of
1.
interest. That would be places like Pakistan,
Scary.
Uzbekistan, Iraq, Iran. And look at China. Look at what is happening there. You also have 300 known terrorists. As we heard in the impeachment articles today, under President Trump, you had no more than a dozen total over 4 years that were coming in the country. What do you have under Joe Biden? You've got over 300 suspected terrorists. Even last week, we had an issue
okay,
where
we're finally getting numbers here.
DOJ
I don't know if I knew these numbers.
FBI and the other agencies were admitting they
300
had lost track
suspected
of a terrorist from
terrorists.
Afghanistan, and he was free roaming the country for a year. Now,
all
in
the
addition
committee
to the
hearings, they
terrorists
say
and
we'll
the
talk
people
to you
from
after
countries of
this,
interest,
or
fentanyl is
closed
coming
hearing.
across our borders. It is being smuggled in by the cartels. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death of Americans ages 18 to 45. Fentanyl, a drug that China has the precursor chemicals, and they are manufacturing this in labs that they have set up with, oh, by the way, the cartels in Mexico. And the cartels are the distribution hub for fentanyl. I talk to parents regularly who have a child who has lost a life or become addicted because of fentanyl. And in addition to all the fentanyl, then you have the human trafficking. What is really so sad to me when you look at human trafficking, and for the cartels, human trafficking is a business. And it has grown from a business that was $500 million a year in this country in 2018. And today, it is a $13 billion a year business. And if you don't think the cartels are big business, if you don't think they're global entities, look at this. Globally, human trafficking is a $150 billion a year business. Where do these people want to come? Right here. They want to come into our country. Now, on top of this, there are more than 400,000 migrant children, many of them who have been recycled and abused by the cartels. And yes, indeed, the cartels are so into this human trafficking now that they've devised a scheme.
It was hard to watch.
It is child abuse. They take a little child. They write their name and the phone number to contact on that child's back. They put that child with a cartel member they're trying to get into the country. They pose as a family for the purpose of claiming asylum. And then, once the cartel member is across the border, what does he do? He lets the child go. Lets the child go. And the child is sent back to Mexico. So we add to all of these issues with the terrorists, with the people from countries of interest, with the drugs, with the human trafficking, with the sex trafficking. You look at what is happening to these children. And tens of thousands of these 400,000 children have been forced into really horrific, exploitative situations, including child labor and sex trafficking. And across the country, you have dangerous illegal alien criminals. They're called criminal aliens who should never have been able to come into this country in the first place. They have harmed, they have murdered innocent Americans. So all of these reasons add to why we should move forward with this impeachment. And on top of it, you add that Secretary Mayorkas has repeatedly lied to Congress about our border being secure. And he likes to say he's done everything to prevent this, but we know he's done everything to allow it and to allow the flow to continue. Last year, DHS, his agency, deported less than 5% of all migrant encounters at the border. And in 2022, only 10% of all criminal illegal aliens in the U.S. were arrested. While a border wall would do so much to help end the border crisis, Secretary Mayorkas stated, from day one, this administration has made clear that a border wall is not the answer. His words. From day one, they've made clear that a wall is not the answer. Well, let me tell you something. Walls work. Walls work. Throughout history,
Imagine
walls
if we had a
have
wall,
worked.
Trump got it up. It would be so
The evidence is
good.
overwhelming. Secretary Mayorkas has refused to uphold his constitutional duty of securing the homeland, and the American people are suffering the consequences. 5 years ago, Leader Schumer was all too happy to lead a partisan, baseless impeachment trial against President Trump. Yet today, when faced with a secretary who is unfit for office, Leader Schumer is trying to prevent a Senate trial and dismiss the House's articles of impeachment. Never before has the Senate dismissed impeachment charges without holding a trial. When I talk to Tennesseans, they talk about their frustration with Washington, D.C., and their frustration with two tiers of justice. It seems there's a tier for the Democrats and the elites and illegals, and another for Republicans and President Trump and people who are conservative. It's important that Secretary Mayorkas be held to account. For 3 years, he has done President Biden's bidding by opening the border to millions of illegal aliens. And if this chamber upholds its constitutional duty to hold a trial, I will vote to convict Secretary Mayorkas and remove him from office. Now, while the Biden administration is working to make illegal immigration legal, border states such as Texas are stepping up to do what this administration will not do, and that is to secure the border. Over recess, I spent time in El Paso, Texas, to see firsthand how Governor Abbott and authorities in the Lone Star State are working to keep communities safe. Now, it is a part of the efforts in Texas to deter illegal immigration, and Texas is taking this seriously to make certain that they secure property there along the Rio Grande. What they have done is to place buoys in the river, shipping containers on the embankment, and razor wire behind that, and fences behind that. They've done this along the Rio Grande there at El Paso to prevent illegal aliens from coming in through El Paso. Texas has bolstered its barriers, and what you're seeing now is that the illegal aliens are traveling further to the west. They're going to New Mexico, they're going to Arizona, they're going to California. Why? Because they're looking for somewhere easier that they can get into the country illegally. Bear in mind, the coyotes, they're working hard for all of these groups and for the cartels, and nobody enters without paying a coyote. Now, when you look at what Texas is doing, taking this into their own hands, and you've got the state, you've got local counties. They're spending billions at the state level and millions in these counties, and as a result, illegal
I guess you
immigration
could
in
say
Texas
that.
dropped by 54%
Right-wing legal
between
eagle.
December
Look,
and January.
pendulum's
and in
got
the
to
Del Rio
swing.
sector, which
It's kind of
includes
crazy.
Eagle
Legal
Pass,
Eagle's a DC
illegal
attorney, I
entries
think,
fell
and, you know,
by 76%.
you're going to get that DC
Mr.
perspective.
President, this shows you border walls work. The Border Patrol has been telling us for decades, we need a barrier,
Hey,
we need
no
better
problem.
technology where we cannot
Hey,
have
everybody.
a barrier, and we need more officers and agents. So while the Biden administration
Thank
pretends
you,
otherwise,
everybody.
knowing that walls work should not be a surprise. Border walls, from ancient Athens to the Great Wall of China, they protected cities, they protected nations for thousands of years. Border barriers are used on nearly every continent on Earth to protect countries from illegal entry, from drug smuggling, and from terrorism. But instead of supporting Texas and its successful efforts to deter illegal immigration, this administration and this Secretary of Homeland Security, they think it's a good thing to go sue Texas and try to make them remove their border barriers. While Texas has accomplished a lot in securing their border, protecting families, and saving American lives, President Biden's attack on our border security has placed a tremendous burden on our border states and communities, and indeed, every town has turned into a border town. Every state, a border state,
New York's
all across
crazy.
this country, because of what is happening with drug trafficking, with human trafficking, with sex
Southern District of
trafficking,
New
with
York.
crime in communities. While I was in Eagle Pass, I sat down with some ranchers and farmers who have had their property destroyed, stolen, broken into by illegal aliens crossing into our country from Mexico. In one instance, 2 migrants broke into a rancher's home while his 16-year-old daughter was studying at home alone. Texas law enforcement also warned about the ways cartels are using new technology to aid their smuggling operations, including by using Chinese-owned TikTok to recruit Americans into their human trafficking rings. At the same time, cartels are flying drones into the U.S. to scope out the location of border agents and redirect their smuggling routes.
I heard
More
that
than
one
anything
before.
else, authorities in Texas told me that they need more border wall construction, better technology, and more agents. So if Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden refuse to help them, Congress has to step in. That's why I introduced legislation called the Container Act, which would empower border states, such as Texas, to place temporary barriers on federal land to protect their communities. No state or locality should face lawsuits from the federal government for trying to secure our border and to protect the sovereignty of the United States of America. I also introduced the
ma'am.
Clear Act, which would reaffirm
Let's
the
give her a
authority of
yes, sir.
state and local governments to enforce federal immigration laws by apprehending, detaining, and then transferring illegal aliens to federal custody. Among its important measures, this legislation would require the Department of Homeland Security to
Yes,
provide grants to
Senator
state and local
Marsha
governments
Blackburn
to help
is
them enforce immigration law
pretty
and
cool.
construct detention
I like her.
facilities.
She looks like
It
my
would
mom
also
a little bit.
require DHS to take illegal aliens into custody within 48 hours after receiving a request from a state or locality and provide the Justice Department with essential information about illegal aliens who have overstayed their period of stay in this country. After my visit to Eagle Pass, I know these pieces of legislation would do so much to support our border
So
security
Eagle Pass is like a
along
border
these
city.
border states, and I
believe.
am hopeful that this president and his Department of Homeland Security
Or
will
is
have
it?
a change of heart and will move forward with securing our southern border, just as this chamber should move forward with an impeachment trial on Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas.
Okay. Thank you,
could
Senator.
be forced to help the government
Who is this?
help
Blumenthal?
unchecked authority
Wyden?
to
I
order
don't know.
Americans to spy on behalf of their
Oregon.
government. This
Democrat,
was slipped
Oregon.
in, Mr. President, in the last minutes in the House of Representatives bill, and this is the first time this language has ever been considered here in the United States Senate. Under current law, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the government can order the phone companies and email and internet service providers to hand over communications.
It's all about FISA.
This bill expands that existing power dramatically. It says, and I quote, the government can force cooperation from, quote, any other service provider who has access to equipment that is being or may
So
be
if I'm
used
not
to
mistaken,
transmit or store
FISA
wire
passed
or
in the
electronic
House. Now the
communications.
senators
Now,
are talking.
the language I just
about
read
FISA.
to the Senate means that if you have access to any communications, the government can force you to help it spy. That means anybody with access to a server, a wire, a cable box, a Wi-Fi router, a phone, or a computer. So think for a moment about the millions of Americans who work in buildings and offices.
So it's
in which
a very
communications are stored or passed
bipartisan
through.
issue. You
After
the
all, every
alliances
office
are
building in America has
hilarious
data
in a
cables
way.
running through it.
People are usually at each
People, not
other's
just the
throats,
engineers
at least
who install,
on
maintain,
television,
repair our
or
communications infrastructure.
more or less reaching
There are
across the
countless
aisle
others
and
who could be forced to help the government spy,
agreeing
including those who clean offices in
FISA
our
should
buildings.
not be renewed or
If this provision
expanded, or
is
at least there
enacted,
should be a Warren
the government
Amendment,
can deputize
but
any of these
looks
people
like it's
against their
headed for
will
the Senate.
and
No
force them,
Warren
in
Amendment.
effect, to become
And,
what amounts to an agent
okay,
from
this
Big
time
Brother.
we're going to
For example,
follow the rules.
forcing an employee to insert a USB thumb drive into a server at an office they clean or guard at night. This can all happen without
That's
any
too bad,
oversight
Jeff.
whatsoever.
Jeffrey.
The FISA court won't know about it.
Yeah,
The
you're
Congress
not
won't know
kidding.
about it. Americans who are handed these directives will be forbidden from talking about it. Unless they can afford high-priced lawyers with security clearances who know their way around the FISA court, they will have no recourse
All right.
to authorities after America find
her career, and today we're looking.
Who do we have
President?
here?
Senator from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come here today to commemorate
Senator
the retirement of
Tom
one
Tillis
of my
from North
longest-serving
Carolina,
staff
Republican.
in my time in the Senate, Deborah Jarrett. She's been my administrative director for the last 9 years. She's worked in the Senate for 29 years. I was looking up on the
Thank you, Lady Kara.
internet earlier today to give you an idea of
Pierce
how
spoke.
long ago 29 years was. That was the year that ladies were getting Rachel haircuts because Friends was one of the most popular shows on. Jennifer Aniston was rocking the Rachel haircut. Boyz II Men was topping the chart. It was a long time ago. And Deborah really quickly demonstrated that this was probably the right place for her to start her career, and today we're looking at her turning another chapter. My staff put together some comments that I'm being loosely advised by, but they said it was a bittersweet moment. Well, I personally think it's bitter. I'm sure it's sweet for Deborah, the person who's going to be retiring. I think it's probably a violation of my rules to point back here to where Deborah's sitting, so I'm not going to do that. But if it wasn't a violation of the rules, I'd point there that that's Deborah sitting here behind me on my wing, which she's been several times before. When you come to the Senate, the amazing thing about coming to U.S. Senate, I came in 2015. They say, congratulations, they swear you in. They give you an allocation of money to run your operations. North Carolina's you got about almost 11 million people, so that dictates how much money you have to set up a state operation and a D.C. operation, but that's it. Your personnel practices, who you hire, how you provision computers, basically the whole running of the business operation. There's not some special department there. That's something you have to do. So one thing you learn very quickly is to find a highly competent person to do that. And I was blessed to have the opportunity to bring Deborah in. I said she's been in my office for 9 years, been in the Senate for 29 years. I should start by saying she was born and raised in St. Joe, Indiana, population 460. Then she started to work for Dan Coates, senator from Indiana, as his legislative aide back in 1995. And then in 1999,
Senator from North Carolina, not too exciting.
Drug cartel. Oriented Deborah is.
Who do we got coming up next?
Out of-
So we're on a little bit of almost a 2-hour
Secretary
delay.
Alejandro Mayorkas took an oath that all of us in the chamber have taken, an oath that many of us have taken that have served in the military, an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And here we are 3 years later in the worst border crisis our nation's ever seen. I rise today because we find ourselves at a critical moment in our nation's history, a moment when the integrity of this very chamber and its leadership is being tested, a time when we will see if our colleagues across the aisle are willing to do the right thing and hold Alejandro Mayorkas accountable for his dereliction of duty that has left our country a shell of what she once was. Now, with over 11 million border crossings, including 2 million unvetted gotaways now living here on the United States soil, and amongst those are an unknown number of terrorists, violent gang members, and drug cartels, Mayorkas has broken his oath, resulting in this dangerous and deadly invasion of our country. All you have to do is read your hometown news. You're going to find a person in your community that's died from fentanyl, or that's been physically abused or murdered by one of these unvetted illegal aliens. From the moment Secretary Mayorkas took office, he has skirted the Constitution and broken the law as outlined in the Secure Fence Act of 2006, which clearly states he must maintain operational control and, to quote that same law, prevent unlawful entries into the United States. In the past 3 years alone, we've had nearly 2 million known gotaways successfully evade capture and enter country, a number that includes hundreds of violent gang members and terrorists. And to put that into perspective, to scale this issue today, over 800 gotaways will legally cross into this country. Yesterday, over 800 unvetted gotaways escaped into our country, and tomorrow, 800 more unvetted aliens will end up here on the United States soil, living in communities around the country. Now, maybe that's why law enforcement officers recently told me back home that we cannot arrest ourselves out of this crisis, that they are so overwhelmed by crime now related to these illegal crossings, we cannot arrest ourselves out of this predicament. Now, Secretary Mayorkas has given free rein to drug cartels to smuggle in illegal aliens and deadly drugs like fentanyl, resulting in the deaths of 300 Americans every day, with a total of over 250,000 fentanyl-related poisoning murders, deaths occurring under his watch. That's 3 times more than the number of brave soldiers we lost in the Vietnam War. 3 times more. The Secretary has turned a blind eye to the exploitation of our borders by terrorists, Chinese nationals, and other high-risk individuals, causing the largest influx of terrorist border crossings in our nation's history. And let us not forget the abuse and weaponization of parole and asylum. Secretary Mayorkas has illegally admitted nearly 800,000 aliens per year, 800,000 under this parole, compared to just 5,000 per year under President Obama or President Trump. 800,000 versus 5,000 a year. There's no question that the situation at our borders is dire, and the responsibility of this historic crisis lies squarely at the feet of those who have failed to address it. Instead of fulfilling his obligation to the American people, Secretary Mayorkas has unraveled our national security, unleashed our border into chaos, and launched an unmitigated disaster and culture of lawlessness that has left Lady Liberty vulnerable to exploitation. His actions, or lack thereof his actions, have endangered the safety of every American, and there must be consequences. Congress must step in and do their job that President Biden refuses to do and fire Secretary Mayorkas. Enough is enough. Americans deserve better. We are here today because we take our oath seriously. With the House managers delivered the articles of impeachment to the Senate chambers today, I hope our colleagues across the aisle, who also took an oath to protect and defend our great nation, will do the right thing. Let's bring this to a trial. Let's debate his record, and for the sake of America's safety and security, let's impeach Alejandro Mayorkas. Taking this decisive action will send a clear message to this administration. They'll be held accountable for orchestrating this deadly invasion. Thank you. Mr. President, I yield back.
So, who noticed? Smash. I did start streaming multiple times a day, and I hit like a real good groove at one point, and I got 1,000, and then I went to 2,000 and 3,000, and I'm trying to keep up the momentum until it comes to a screeching halt.
From Wisconsin.
Mr. President, earlier today we heard a very convincing case laid out by the House managers of why the Senate should fulfill its constitutional duty and proceed to a trial on the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas. If we were to hold that trial, and we should do so, this chart that I've been developing since I became Chairman of Homeland Security in 2015 would basically be the irrefutable DNA evidence of the crime. What I've tried to lay out in this chart is the cause and effect of an ongoing set of illegal immigration crises faced by the last 3 administrations. And so what I'd like to do briefly here on the Senate floor is go through that history dating back to 2012 and show the impact of certain actions, certain court decisions, certainly the lack of faithfully executing the law in this administration has now resulted in an invasion of our country. But let's go back to 2012. That's where this chart begins. Even before that,
My daughter just
I had developed a chart showing on an annual basis the number of unaccompanied children coming to this country, average for many years, somewhere between 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 a year.
General practice,
in
but I mean,
June of 2012,
civil, corporate,
President Obama
and
issued his, what I
I'm
would
getting
consider
into
lawless,
election more and more.
unlawful, deferred action on childhood arrivals. That is what
She's
sparked
trying to come
all
in
the
and,
succeeding illegal immigration crises. Is that unlawful order, which by the way, was a complete misuse of prosecutorial discretion, which is supposed to be meted out or administered on a case-by-case basis. And for the first time, President Obama and his administration granted prosecutorial discretion to hundreds of thousands of people.
I try to listen.
And the world took note.
Thank
what happened
you,
over
Josh.
the intervening years is people realize America's law has changed. And we had reports when people come to this country illegally, they would get their notice to appear before an immigration court. Well, that was used by human traffickers down in Central America. They called that the permiso, the permission slip to come to this country. So a couple of years after that unlawful order, deferred action on childhood arrivals, President Obama faced
She really wants to come on stream. I don't know.
He actually called it a humanitarian crisis.
She's too precious
May and June of 2014,
for the internet.
they averaged about 2,200 encounters per day. 2,200.
Okay.
That seems like the good old days. That's that little bump in comparison to President Biden's crisis.
My wife's going to kill me.
So President Obama actually took action. He started detaining family units with children that came across the border, and it worked. he brought down the number of people crossing this into our country illegally because there was a consequence to it. Unfortunately, in February 2015, pro-immigration groups, pro-illegal immigration groups, took the Obama administration to court under the Flores settlement, which basically back in the 1990s, there's a court case with a young immigrant girl named Flores. And the result of that settlement said that DHS could not hold an unaccompanied child for more than 20 days. Again, an unaccompanied child. So the Obama administration interpreted that, well, we can certainly hold a child when they're detained with their family. All these, again, pro-illegal immigration groups took the Obama administration to court, took Secretary Jay Johnson to court, and they reinterpreted the Flores settlement and said, no, you can't detain a child even if they are accompanied by their parents. And so the Obama administration faced a real decision. Should we detain the parents and release the child into HHS custody? They chose not to do that, except in some situations where they felt that wasn't a real family unit and that those parents may be
4 and 5 are great ages.
And you can see that the result of that, basically catch and release, is what that result did. And you can see the numbers start increasing prior to President Trump taking office. Now, if you remember, President Trump during his election made the open border, that catch and release, a huge issue in the campaign. And so when he got elected, again, the world noticed. They felt there's going to be a real crackdown on illegal immigration.
She's trying to use the non-touch screen monitor as a touch screen right now. It's funny.
To when President Trump first took office. But unfortunately, the law didn't change. That Flores reinterpretation stood. So President Trump was faced with trying to figure out how can he utilize what laws existed, what authority he had, with no help from Congress, to address this situation. He wasn't able to address it immediately. And as a result, you can see the increase of not only single adults, but family units exploiting that provision, and unaccompanied children. To the point where in May of 2019, he hit his high point.
She's lost
almost
interest.
5,000 people per day. But you'll notice President Trump did something about it. He enacted migrant protection program. He instituted safe third country agreements with countries in Central America. He had to threaten the president of Mexico with tariffs so the president of Mexico would cooperate with us in securing our border. And over the next 12 months, President Trump, by and large, secured the border. To hit a low point in April of 2020, when a little more than 500 people per day were trying to come to this country illegally. Now, what President Trump also had starting in March of 2020 during the pandemic, remember, all of this reduction in illegal immigration occurred before the pandemic. But once the pandemic was in full swing in March and April of 2020, President Trump used his authority under Title 42 and used that health emergency to start deporting people coming to this country illegally. So you can see the very small, the purple bar are the people expelled using Title 42 authority. So even though the number of single adults was rising, by the way, the reason they were rising is during the presidential debate of 2020, every Democrat presidential candidate said they're going to end deportations and offer free health care. So again, that's the signal. The world listens to what elected officials or potentially elected officials say, and they believe them. They also believe their eyes when once people start coming in here, they're either detained and expelled or they're not detained. But anyway, so people started coming into this country again, assuming that President Biden was going to win the election,
Mayorkas
and the border would be opened up. And of course, that's exactly what happened. Because once President Biden took office, he used the exact same executive authority that President Trump used. Let me just quick cover that. Even after the Flores reinterpretation, the Supreme Court, in a ruling in 2018, said that existing law, even though it was weakened by that reinterpreted Flores decision or settlement, that the current law exudes deference to the executive branch. President Trump used that deference. President Trump used that executive authority and pretty well closed the border.
Right.
President Biden came into office and with literally hundreds of executive actions, completely reversed President Trump's successful border security measures using that exact same presidential authority. All that deference. But the point that's important to understand is President Biden wanted an open border. He caused this crisis. He could end it if he wanted to. He still has the authority. Republicans in the Senate would be happy to strengthen that authority to overturn this Flores reinterpretation.
Really closely.
Which, by the way, Secretary Jay Johnson opposed that reinterpretation. He didn't like that court decision. So we would have been happy to strengthen President Biden's authority, but he doesn't really need us to secure the border. That's the point.
Is the app?
And again, here's the DNA, the irrefutable DNA evidence of the crime. This didn't have to happen. President Biden didn't have to reverse President Trump's successful border security executive orders. But he reversed them and he opened up the border.
Let me see if I can
and the
figure
result
that
now
out. Colors.
is probably more than 6 million people have come to this country illegally and stayed. That's a number greater than the population of 31 states. That's the order of magnitude of the problem. The impact of this open border policy is devastating. It is a catastrophe. Not only does this open border policy facilitate the multi-billion-dollar business model of some of the most evil people on the planet, the human traffickers, the sex traffickers, the drug traffickers. How many hundreds of thousands of Americans have died of fentanyl overdoses? President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas said that they're reversing all of Trump's border security provisions because they said it was inhumane. There's nothing humane about facilitating human and sex and drug trafficking. And of course, the migrants coming in this country, It is true, Venezuela is emptying their jails, their mental
So I'm
institutions.
not sure what the colors mean either.
There's some bad people. There are some criminals coming in this country. And, of course, we see evidence with these migrant crimes.
Tried to figure it out. Oh, wait.
Horrific
is that
crimes. People
Is
who,
it on
who
the
no
side
longer
there? It's saying
are alive
something.
because of President Biden's open border policies, because of Secretary Mayorkas executing President Biden's open border policies. Now,
Single adults.
I'm not a lawyer. I'm
Okay.
not a prosecutor. But I believe it's a crime to aid and abet other crimes.
Is
So,
orange
my
maybe
standpoint, I think
single
the
adults?
House managers ought to be allowed to make their case. Again, they laid out a very compelling articles of impeachment today. It's a pretty simple case. It probably won't take that long of time for them to make
Red
their
something
case,
with an
to
M.
present it for the Senate. Why won't Majority Leader Schumer allow the House managers to make their case?
Purple.
Why won't he allow the Senate
Blue.
to fulfill its constitutional duty to try impeachments? Listen,
It's a 10
impeachments are not that
chart.
regular.
What kind of research is backing the
The
graph?
least we can do is fulfill that constitutional duty and listen to the
Just
evidence.
the numbers. I don't know if it's
Allow the
research
House
or
managers
just
to make their
numbers
case.
of people.
I think their case is overwhelmingly convincing.
Oh no, I think
The
red might
repercussions
be
of President Biden and
minors.
Secretary Mayorkas' open border policy will be
Let me-
felt by Americans for years, if not decades, to come.
See if I could.
About the only thing Congress can do when a president or a member of the executive branch is not faithfully executing the laws, when they're completely derelict in their duty,
See,
when
I
their
think
dereliction of
that
duty
says
or the lack of
minors,
faithfully executing the laws is
something,
resulting in the deaths of
single
Americans.
adults.
Again, the open border policy is resulting in the deaths of American
Something.
citizens.
Stay out of the way.
It's resulting in young women being forced into the sex trafficking trade. It's resulting in higher levels of fentanyl overdoses.
I think
That
red
evidence
is
needs to be
minors.
heard. That case
I
needs
don't
to be
know.
made. The Senate should hold a trial. With that, Mr.
I don't
President,
know
yield the
where I
floor.
put my window. There I am. I got your picture that you painted. She did this today on the. Can you see? This is today.
Mr. President.
What are the dots right there?
Mr.
What are
President,
those?
I will get to the issue of Secretary Mayorkas' impeachment in a moment. But first, I'd like to speak to Iran's attack on Israel this weekend. We all saw what happened
boy.
on Saturday
I gotta
evening.
adjust
Israel
this
is
a
once
little
again
bit.
under attack. This time under direct attack from Iran. And the United States must clearly and strongly stand with a great ally and fully support its right and obligation to defend itself by any means necessary. I was just in Israel a few weeks ago to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu and see the terror and devastation that Iran-backed Hamas terrorists unleashed on the Jewish state on October 7th firsthand. More than 1,200 were murdered, and hundreds are still being held hostage by Hamas just for being Jewish. Americans are among the hostages and those murdered that day. The horrors of that attack are difficult to describe and can never, ever happen again. Today, I continue to pray for the safety of the Israeli people and call on every Republican and every Democrat to stand unequivocally with Israel as it fights for its very existence against evil terrorism. Mr. President, again and again, Democrats have blocked the passage of aid for Israel. Democrats have blocked Israel aid 4 times in the U.S. Senate. The House has passed a good bill that is ready for Senate passage right now. I urge Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to immediately put the House-passed Israel aid bill on the floor, as well as my Stop Taxpayer Funding of Hamas Act tonight. Nothing before the Senate is more important, and I will do everything in my power to make sure that vote happens as soon as possible. Let's all remember who the enemy is here, and has always been: the evil and terror-supporting regime in Iran. Since its first days, the Biden administration has emboldened Iran with appeasement, freeing billions upon billions of dollars to fuel Iran's support of terrorism, and turning its back on Israel. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East and one of America's strongest allies. But it took President Biden months to meet or speak with Prime Minister Netanyahu after he took office. And unfortunately, the world took notice. Since October 7th, President Biden and Democrats in Washington have continued to undermine Israel's fight against Iran-backed Hamas terrorists, further isolating our ally in its greatest time of need. And here's where what has happened in Israel ties into the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas that we are dealing with here at home this week. America and the freedom-loving nations of the world are less safe and secure because of President Biden's weakness and appeasement of evil regimes and the terror each support. That is a fact that the FBI director confirmed when I questioned him in the Homeland Security Committee last year. And the terrifying truth is that while President Biden's weakness has emboldened our enemies, Secretary Mayorkas has shown that he will do absolutely nothing to stop evil people from invading our country through our southern border and launching attacks on the U.S. homeland. This isn't some hypothetical nightmare. The possibility of an attack by terrorists on U.S. soil is something the FBI and U.S. intelligence community are terrified about. The threats are all up. We know terrorists are coming into America because of the wide open southern border. That is a fact. America is a more dangerous place because Mayorkas and Biden have allowed criminals, drugs, terrorists, and other dangerous people into our communities. There are real consequences to the failure to secure the border, and each victim has a name. Real Americans with families are being killed. Real American families are being torn apart by vicious crimes and deadly drugs because we have a
I
wide
think
open
Senator Scott might have recycled
innocent
the speech.
Americans like Lincoln Riley are paying the ultimate price for Mayorkas' failure. 10 million people have illegally crossed, and 6 million have been allowed to stay and had the red carpet rolled out for them courtesy of the American taxpayer. There have been sexual assaults and murders committed by illegal aliens all across this country. Even in my home state of Florida, where a young man was recently killed. The man charged for his death is an illegal alien. Now, because of these failures, the Republican majority in the House has voted to impeach Mayorkas for violating his oath of office. They took their time, they got the evidence, they made the decision to impeach. Whether anyone in this chamber here believes that was right or wrong, that happened, and we should now hold a trial to let Mayorkas make his case. That is our constitutional duty. But unlike what happened in 2019, when Democrats alone voted to impeach the president and Republicans controlled the Senate, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is going to deny Secretary Mayorkas the ability to defend himself in a trial. He will not have the ability to defend himself in a trial. It seems to me that the Majority Leader doesn't want to let Mayorkas defend himself in a trial for one of two reasons. The Majority Leader is either acting out of pure political interest to protect his incumbent members who don't want to talk about Mayorkas' record and the wide open border he has created and all the crimes, drugs, and illegal immigration it's allowing, or the Majority Leader is just tired of a trial exposing Mayorkas' failure to a degree that acquittal will be extremely painful for the Democrats to explain to the American people. Here's what I don't understand. Democrats voted against a bill to stop illegal aliens from getting on a commercial flight with no verifiable ID. You have to, they don't. Democrats voted against deporting illegal aliens who hurt police. And Democrats voted against the Lincoln Riley Act, which simply requires ICE to take illegal aliens who commit crimes into custody before tragedy strike. So it seems to me that Democrats have no problem voting to keep the border crisis going and blocking every attempt the Republicans make to stop the crime and secure the border. But when it comes to Secretary Mayorkas, they shut everything down and don't let them speak. Secretary Mayorkas is a former prosecutor. Surely he knows how to handle himself and defend his actions. He must believe he has a case to present to the American people on why he should not be found guilty. But he's not going to get that chance. And Senate Democrats are setting a dangerous precedent and destroying the rules and traditions of the Senate to keep Mayorkas silent. I have one question. Is Mayorkas been silenced because Democrats are terrified of his record, are unable to defend him, or because they don't trust him? Whatever the answer might be, I urge my Democrat colleagues to get over the discomfort that's causing them and do what is right for the safety of American families. The events of this weekend have shown once again that the world is a much more dangerous place under President Biden's failed leadership. If Democrats put politics over the safety of American families and the security of our great nation, I fear the consequences will be devastating beyond our worst fears. I want everybody to stop for one moment. Stop to think about their families. Think about their mom or their dad, or their sister or brother, their wife. Think about their children or their grandchildren or their nieces and nephews. Since Biden took office, people like that, just like your family that you love and cherish, people like that, here's what's happened to them. Some have died of drug overdoses. Some have been raped. Some have been murdered. Some have been sold into slavery, basically. It's devastating. I don't know how anybody could sit there and not care about people just like their mom, their dad, their brother, their sister, their spouse, their children or their grandchildren, or their nieces and nephews. But that's exactly what's going on here when we do not have the opportunity to hold Mayorkas accountable. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Pro-illegal immigrant when Flores, HR coming in, her policy is
nothing before the Senate.
And that's unprecedented. Just last week,
I don't know how he
it was
got
reported
back
that
in
an
time
Afghan,
there. Let's see, who's this?
Numerous times, he swore before
Tuberville,
this body protect
Republican,
and to defend
Alabama.
our country against all threats, foreign and domestic. Is our border secure? The answer is simple. Mayorkas has intentionally failed to do his job. Now, Senator Schumer and the globalist Democrats have the opportunity to conduct a full and a fair trial before the entire Senate and the public. Unfortunately, that's not how this is going to play out. Democrats are going to try to table the articles of impeachment, which has never been done in the history of the Senate. They're going to attempt to sweep the border crisis that President Biden has created under the rug. Every single House Democrat voted to save Mayorkas' job. They endorsed our wide open borders that have allowed terrorists, drug traffickers, and murderers into our country. Democrats are lying to themselves and risking the lives of every American. Senator Schumer and the Democrats can't say they want to fix our borders while voting to save Mayorkas' job. Mayorkas has been derelict in his duty to secure the border in the 3 years he's been on the job. Our border is the least secure it has ever been. In fact, it's almost non-existent. Our Border Patrol agents are so overwhelmed and receive such little support from the Biden administration to enforce our laws that they have been forced to release millions of illegal immigrants into the United States. And those who are released on parole, they're even given work permits. The Biden administration is more concerned with taking care of illegal aliens than they are about protecting American citizens. We might as well start mailing every criminal, drug trafficker, and terrorist an open invitation to cross our borders. I've spoken numerous times on this floor to highlight stories of Americans who have died at the hands of illegal aliens. Their tragic deaths are
So
a
it's hard
direct
to say,
result
Josh.
of Secretary Mayorkas' inaction.
Everybody
Mayorkas and Joe
is
Biden have
assuming
blood on their
that
hands.
Schumer's not
The
going
most
to take it
important
up at all.
responsibility
And it looks
of any
like
sovereign
that's what's
nation
going to happen,
is
but
the
Schumer's
safety
kind of
of
talking
its
like he
citizens.
might.
Yet, what
So
did
I
the
don't know.
Democrat
I
Homeland
don't know if there's
Security
been enough
announce this
pressure
last week?
to make
They
Schumer
plan on
change
sending
his
another
tune.
$300 million to communities receiving
My guess
illegal
is
aliens
they're
from this border
going
crisis.
to
The
not
top priority
take
of this
it up.
administration is to
That
let as many
seems
people
to be what everybody
in as quickly
thinks
as
is going
possible,
to happen.
regardless of how many American lives are lost
Really,
in the process.
you know, how the sausage.
The number of people crossing
they
the
say,
U.S.
you know,
are
no one wants to see how the
on
sausage
the
is
terrorist
made.
watch list.
I don't
And
know
that's
if this is
unprecedented.
beyond the
Just
sausage
last week,
factory.
it was reported that an Afghan on the FBI terror watch list has been in the U.S. for almost a year. He is a member of a U.S. designated terrorist group responsible for the deaths of at least 9 Americans, and they're American soldiers, by the way, and civilians in Afghanistan. ICE arrested him in San Antonio just this past February. Unfortunately, this known terrorist has been released on bond. He's now roaming our neighborhoods. You know, it just isn't terrorists we have to worry about. Fentanyl flowing freely across our borders, and it's killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. Not thousands, hundreds of thousands. Law enforcement officers in my state of Alabama tell me time and again how their officers must wear heavy equipment, carry Narcan spray to protect themselves from fentanyl that is pouring into our communities. And by the way, most will tell you they never heard of fentanyl until this administration came into power.
An impeachment trial can mean prison.
Despite the critical need to secure our borders and discourage illegal immigration, Mayorkas has been traveling the world.
Trial, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
impeachment,
Mayorkas,
you're
traveling the world, lecturing other countries
there might
about
be
their
some
national security.
other things they could
While
do.
his
but
refusal
let
to
me
enforce
find
U.S.
out.
laws has exposed his own country to an invasion.
Fancy
It's
dancy
embarrassing.
Westlaw
In February, he
AI.
traveled to
It's
Austria
not like
to speak with Chinese
ChatGPT
officials about
or Google
counter-narcotic efforts. Did he discuss with them the flood of Chinese illegal immigrants coming to the U.S. through the southwest border? 22,000 Chinese nationals have been arrested by Border Patrol agents at the southwest border since October of last year and released into our country. Most of these individuals are single, adult, male, military age. Yet the media tries to act like all these people crossing the border are innocent women and children. Now, some of them are, but most are not. This invasion is more than a border crisis. It is a national crisis. And yet, I seriously doubt Mayorkas even brought up the point in his meeting with these Chinese officials. In February, he was in Germany for the Munich Security Conference. The Munich Security Conference is the largest international security meeting in the world. Mayorkas was there giving speeches on strengthening global security and partnerships. Meanwhile, the border he is responsible for is wide open, and thousands of people are dying. Give me a break. Our allies must be laughing at us, absolutely laughing. The Secretary's priority should be here in our country, securing our borders, protecting our citizens. President Biden has made the U.S. a joke around the world. This administration,
ask the question.
Under this administration, nearly 10 million people have invaded our country. Every state is now a border state.
Homeland Security is impeached by Congress.
This is not a gray area.
Possible punishments
Secretary
from that
Mayorkas
proceeding.
has intentionally
And
failed to do his job. He has personally lied to me to my face 3 times in the last 3 years. A United States Senator, just tell me the truth. He can't say the truth. He can't tell you the truth.
Can't control
My Democratic
4-year-olds.
colleagues, have you read
They
the
do their
heartbreaking
own
stories
thing.
of innocent Americans who have been murdered by illegal aliens? Are you concerned? Are you concerned about the safety of your spouses, your kids, your nieces,
So
nephews?
the AI is
Does it
is
worry you that
thinking,
hundreds
and this
of
is
terrorists are
again,
flooding
this
our
is
country?
not.
Does that bother you at all? Do you know someone who has died of
ChatGPT,
fentanyl,
Westlaw's AI
which was
is a
trafficked, by the
little
way, by
slower,
cartels
but
from
it's
other countries?
supposed to
This
be
isn't about politics,
more
folks.
reliable
Our
as far
national
as
security
case law
and
and
our
stuff
country's
goes.
future is at stake. Americans deserve to know the truth about how Secretary Mayorkas has intentionally failed to secure the border. I will be voting to hold Mayorkas accountable. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
All right, we're almost current here.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, we have a job to do. That job is not optional. It's assigned to us by the United States Constitution, a document to which we've all sworn an oath. Under Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6, the Senate has the power, and I would add here, the duty, to try all impeachments. Not just some impeachments, not just those impeachments with which the majority party feels really happy about looking into, but all impeachments. It's the way it's always been in United States history. When the House sends over articles of impeachment, if we have jurisdiction, which we plainly do here, it is our job to conduct a trial. What do I mean by that? Well, it's really a simple concept. In articles of impeachment, an accusation is made. Our job is to just decide whether that accusation is meritorious or not, whether the thing that has been accused is legitimate, whether the person who's been accused did the thing that was wrong, committed the high crime or misdemeanor spoken of in the Constitution. So we have a job to do, and it's a job that the Senate has always done when we have jurisdiction following the adoption of articles of impeachment. Now, let's remember, this is an historic day. This hasn't happened very often. This is only the 22nd time in American history in which articles of impeachment have been adopted by the House. And in this circumstance, where we plainly have jurisdiction, there's no valid basis for us to do anything other than to decide whether the accusations are legitimate.
we have to do that. We don't have the luxury of simply standing back and saying, we don't want to handle it. No, I know. The Senate has found ways of shirking its responsibility over and over and over again in all of the operations of the Senate's work. Sometimes, most of the time, we sit as a legislative body where we consider legislation. We pass law or decline to do so. Other times, we sit in an executive capacity where we review presidential nominations to consider them on whether we should confirm them and also consider treaties. That's in an executive capacity. We also sometimes sit as a court.
Very good question, Josh.
Now, in other areas, the Senate's found ways of shirking its responsibilities. We've handed off a whole lot of the lawmaking power to unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats in the executive branch. In our executive capacity, we have whittled down the number of executive branch nominees that are subject to Senate confirmation, even as the total volume of those individuals has increased. And now it seems we're determined, yet again, to whittle down our responsibilities. In the one area where we have an affirmative duty, an affirmative obligation, an affirmative command within the Constitution requiring us to make a decision. In the immortal words of Rush, in one of my favorite Rush songs of all time, called
100%.
Free Will, if you choose not to decide,
Hunter
you
Biden
still
has
have made
skated
a choice.
because of
And yet
his
that is
father's
what Senate
political
Democrats
power.
are planning
And I'm
to ask
pretty
us to
sure
do
that he's
within
been in
24 hours.
some
To ask us
degree,
to not decide.
deputized
Ask us
is
to
the right
take
word.
these
I think he's
accusations
an
and these
asset
articles
for
of impeachment
intelligence.
duly
He jet
passed
sets around
by
the
a majority
world,
of the House
board
of
meetings,
Representatives,
drugs, who
the body
knows? But
in the Congress
you
has
know,
the
they're
sole power
definitely
to
protecting
impeach.
him.
It's not just 218 plus random people who decided to make the accusation against Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who heads the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. No, it's those particular 218 plus people in the House of Representatives who have that power. You see, there's a reason why the impeachment power belongs exclusively to the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is within the legislative branch, the branch of the federal government most accountable to the people at the most regular intervals. And within the Congress, within the legislative branch, they are the body most accountable to the people at the most regular intervals. That's why they call it the People's House.
By protecting Biden,
they are the only ones entrusted with this power.
protecting
And a majority of them, of that 435-member body,
they believe it.
is concluded that Alejandro Mayorkas.
And they think that even this impeachment
Now,
nonsense, they think that this is not nonsense. It's not
they didn't
nonsense,
do it
but
because
they
of a
think
policy
this
disagreement.
is just
No,
bad for the country.
A majority
This
of the
is
House of
all just
Representatives
rock
has
and
chosen
roll,
to impeach
and I
Secretary
couldn't
Mayorkas
disagree
for
more.
the reason that he has
This is necessary to drag out.
defied
Sunlight
the
makes the
commands
best disinfectant.
of federal law. The laws in particular that he is charged with administering. They've identified at least 7 or 8 different provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act, including sections 235 B2A and 235 B1B2 and 236C.
So if anybody
and 236A
sounds
and
like Ben
212
Shapiro,
B5A,
maybe because
just to
I
mention a
might
few
have
of them.
sped the stream up to 1.5.
The articles of impeachment outline
If you're talking about
myriad
me,
instances in which
I
Secretary
don't think I
Mayorkas
talk fast enough.
has been
Yeah, the stream's at
commanded
1.5.
decisively,
We're on a slight
unambiguously
delay.
to
I think we're less
detain
than maybe
illegal
somewhere
immigrants
in an hour.
pending one
Not an
action
hour
or
delay
another.
maybe, but this
pending
is
one
today's
determination
floor
or another as to
proceedings.
their eligibility, either for immigration parole or for asylum or for something else. He's required to detain them, and he didn't detain them. Just a few examples of the many things that he's done in direct contravention to a direct command by the law. And it's not just that he didn't do the things that he was commanded to do, it's that he did the exact opposite of those things. He was commanded, for example, not to exercise his immigration parole authority under 212 D5A. He's not allowed to do that categorically. He's allowed to do that only for discrete, individualized, particularized circumstances in which there is a profound, pronounced humanitarian or public need. And yet, he issued all these categorical parole orders, creating categorical immigration parole programs, allowing for literally hundreds of thousands of people a year to be brought into this country lawlessly, without documentation, without just cause to be brought into the United States. He made illegal immigrants legal by violating the affirmative command of the law. It's not yet clear exactly what form the arguments presented by the Democrats tomorrow will take, but we do know this: whether they call it a motion to dismiss or a motion to table, they want to not decide something that has to be decided by order of the Constitution by the Senate. These accusations are real, Mr. President. They make a difference. They make a difference to the American people. These crimes, or I should say high crimes and misdemeanors, of which Secretary Mayorkas has been accused, they're not victimless crimes. Far from it, Mr. President.
Amen.
These are offenses that have resulted in millions. On the low end, it's maybe 7 or 8 million. On the high end, it's more like 12, 13, or 14 million.
Oof.
People who have come into this country unlawfully since January 20th, 2021, when the administration of Joe Biden has willfully, intentionally brought people into this country who aren't supposed to be here, who aren't allowed to be here. And it's not
That's what I was
just the
thinking,
addition
too.
of those sheer numbers of
Let me
people.
tell you definitively.
It's the fact that among those people are many
Yes.
thousands of
Mike Lee
military-aged
with a
Chinese
shaved head
males.
is what you're.
Many millions of military-aged males from other countries, including hundreds of suspected terrorists, including thousands who come from countries that we pay close attention to because we know those countries are full of a lot of people who are bent on acts of lawlessness, violence, and terrorism against the United States of America. And this, of course, is just the beginning. This says nothing about the countless neighborhoods and schools and communities and jobs and lives that have been lost or violated or rendered unsafe or all of the above as a result of those who have been brought in, not just with the acquiescence of, but at the invitation of and with the assistance of the Secretary of Homeland Security, the very man whose job it is to protect us from those very things, and who has very specific orders that he follows, orders that have been put into law by the Congress of the United States. Now, he's breaking the law over and over and over again, specifically to allow for illegal immigration. So the Democrats are expected to come along tomorrow and say, yeah, but we don't want to have to decide this. We don't want to have to decide it because, well, it's an election year, President Biden's on the ballot, this is already an area where he's not doing well, and we've got other members of this body, including, a certain senator from Montana, for example, or maybe a certain senator from Ohio, for example, or a senator from Pennsylvania, among others, who are going to be up for re-election. Sure, they'd rather not have to address this. I understand why they'd rather be doing something else, anything else other than this. They would rather reorganize their sock drawer. Some of them would probably much rather have a root canal or another painful procedure without anesthesia than they would have to focus on this. But alas, the Constitution is agnostic as to your sock reorganization days. The Constitution doesn't care how often you go to the dentist and whether you get a root canal with or without anesthesia. But the Constitution does care about one thing, in particular, very relevant here today, and that is that the Senate is to try all impeachments. This is an impeachment. We have to try it, particularly in the absence of the case being rendered moot by a vacancy in office or death or otherwise, circumstances that are noticeably absent here. We have the duty to do this. And what happens when we don't? What happens if they get their way and they choose either to table or to dismiss or use some other fancy word to try to avoid doing their job? What happens? Well, more deaths occur. Deaths like the tragic passing of Laken Riley, who was taken from us just a few weeks ago as a result of Secretary Mayorkas' lawless conduct along the border.
It's just more likely
But
to
for
have an
his lawless conduct
administrative
and his
admin
cavalier treatment of
change,
the law, in
by
fact,
the
his
election in
defiant
November, and then
refusal
by
to abide by the law,
January
and in
you
fact,
have
his dogged determination
new people.
to break the law. Laken Riley would have still been alive. Countless others who have undergone horrific events within their families.
It's crazy that
Murders,
they're going to be able
rapes,
to vote
sexual
on
assaults,
elections.
robberies, drunk driving. All kinds of horrific
Crazy.
trauma that the American people have endured. Now, some of that's going to happen from people who live here already. We shouldn't add to that, Mr. President,
Callan's
by
trying to
bringing
get
in
me in
others
charge, get me in
who
trouble.
shouldn't be here to begin with. This is exactly the kind of thing that our immigration laws are designed to protect against. As one who spent 2 years living and working along our southern border,
Joshua.
living and working among and with the poorest of the poor, including many immigrants themselves, recent immigrants in many cases, I can tell you there's no group of people who has more cause to fear uncontrolled waves of illegal immigration than recent immigrants themselves, including and especially the poor who live on or near a border. It is their jobs, it is their families, it is their schools, it is their neighborhoods, it is their homes that are most directly put in jeopardy. Every single time we fail, or in the case of Secretary Mayorkas, we adamantly refuse to obey and enforce the law, and we do everything that we can to undermine it, as he has done. There is no set of arguments I can imagine. I look forward to hearing what arguments might be had tomorrow, might be presented tomorrow. It could be presented with any kind of a straight face that could say, we need not address the merits of this accusation, because there are none. Perhaps they will argue that this is an accusation amounting to mere maladministration. He didn't do a good job. Well, that's not at all what we have here. Even if that is what we had here, that still wouldn't mean that they didn't have to try the case and come up with an answer as to whether or not he did what they said he did. Look, the impeachment power goes back some 2.5 centuries to the dawn of the Republic. Nearly 2.5 centuries ago, when we became a country, we relied heavily on the legal systems, the tradition, and some cases
Anybody else getting a little bit of Dan Aykroyd vibes from Mike Lee?
And
maybe
during
it's
the early years of the
1.5
Republic,
speed.
we had individuals who were familiar with our Constitution, who were also familiar, having practiced in the law at the time of the Revolution, in some cases before then. They knew the meaning of these words. Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story was one of those individuals who lived, practiced, and wrote at and after the time of the American Revolution, during the early decades of our young republic. And he explained that, among other things, an impeachment could be found. A high crime and misdemeanor could be committed where, for instance, a Lord Admiral was found to have neglected the safeguard of the sea. It's perhaps the most directly analogous comparison he makes to the Secretary of Homeland Security. That would be, best described perhaps as a dereliction of duty, a failure to do one's job. If that, a Lord Admiral...
That was a good episode of Rogan.
...neglecting the safeguard of
wild.
the sea, if that was a high crime and misdemeanor, it follows for sure. It's even more certain
Rogan had
that the Secretary of Homeland Security, having defied more than a half dozen direct commands of federal law and done the
It was the
exact
archaeological
opposite of those
debate
things,
yesterday or today, I don't know.
was also committed a high crime and misdemeanor.
4-hour podcast.
Now, maybe some in this body disagree. Maybe some in this body believe that the facts are different than they have been alleged here. Well, that, Mr. President, that's what a trial's for. That's why we don't just take the word of the House of Representatives for it. We do our job over here. We have to review the accusation, and we have to review it against the backdrop of what arguments and evidence they present to us. We're going to be sworn in tomorrow at 1 p.m. to be finders of fact and to be judges of law relevant to the impeachment accusation. If we decide not to decide, we still have made a choice. We shouldn't do that here. Doing that here would be a dereliction of duty. Doing that here would be profoundly disrespectful to the hundreds of millions of Americans who elected us, and especially to the families of those, like the family of Laken Riley and countless others whose lives have been permanently and tragically disrupted by the lawlessness exhibited by Secretary Mayorkas. We must do our job. We must hold the trial. That trial must culminate in a finding of guilt or innocence. The Constitution and our commitment to it requires nothing less. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
All right.
1,200 custodial work
What do we got?
after graduation wasn't directly awarding one country despite
Sorry for
especially to
jumping
the families of
around.
the representatives.
Oh, God.
For raising children, whether you're carrying names that should
Okay.
more closely with it.
Sherrod
Everything he's done over the
Brown,
course of his
Ohio.
career comes back to the dignity
Democrat.
of work. The idea that hard work should pay off for everyone, whether you punch a clock, whether you swipe a badge, whether you work in an office, whether you work for tips, whether you're raising children, whether you're caring for an aging parent. The dignity of work is what has guided Detailer through his whole career as he's fought to unionize industries that have long been overlooked, with workers who have long been underpaid and ignored. For the past 12 years, Dee served as president of Unite Here,
This might
the union
be
that
not-
represents workers across the
Yeah, this
hospitality
isn't
industry.
right.
Its members work in
What
airports
we're
and
here
food
for.
service,
All right,
standing
all
up to lay off to work with
Sherrod, very good, sir.
Entire region. We think back just
I don't.
still today.
James Lankford.
6 months in a week. Last week.
I mean, he
no, I
just
guess
looks.
9 days
He
ago,
looks like if
I
said
was in Israel.
ChatGPT,
Spent
make
time
me a
with
picture
Israelis,
of
to meet
a
with multiple different
defense,
leaders, get a chance just to be able to talk to different folks in different parts of the country, see what's going on the
contractor executive.
ground.
That's what he looks like. What is he-
Painful moment
what's
for the
his
entire
thing?
world, but definitely a painful moment for Israel and for the entire region. We think back just 7 months ago, and all the conversation was normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And then a group of Hamas terrorists stepped in and killed as many people as they possibly could in an effort to also kill that normalization that's happening around the entire region. To do whatever they could to be able to drive a wedge, and so that peace could not continue to advance in the region. What's happened since then has been painful for the entire world to watch, but it's been really painful for the people of that region more than anyone else. I traveled to the far southern tip of Israel, along the border with Egypt, to be able to meet with some of the folks that are in that area, to be able to talk about the relationships between Egypt and Israel and what's happening day to day. I traveled to the kibbutz that literally are right on the border with Gaza, that are now vacant and empty and devastated. I can't even begin to explain to this body, unless you've seen it before, the pain of walking through a large kibbutz where there were hundreds of people that lived just a few months ago, and now to see every building shot up with bullet holes, burned, destroyed, and think it's 6:38 that morning during a Jewish holiday on that Saturday morning, October the 7th. Many people were still asleep when a group of Hamas terrorists came into their homes and murdered many in that village and took many hostages from that kibbutz. We could literally walk by the doors, and the person who was walking with us could say, that family died, that family's a hostage, that family died.
Is he a minister?
And go door to door as we walk around to be able to see it.
I'm looking.
The person who was walking us through could even walk us through his own home, which is obliterated, and his son's home right there, who died. And then he could point to Gaza and say, my other son is over there in Gaza right now. At the same time, flowers were blooming, and the grounds were beautiful, and you realize the irony of this moment. Hostages being held in Gaza, families that are struggling every single day trying to make sense of this craziness, and trying to figure out why a peaceful kibbutz, living their lives, farming, manufacturing, was overrun by a group of terrorists. Right up the road, we stopped by the Nova Festival site, which is an absolutely beautiful location for an outdoor concert, for venues, for gathering, and has been for years. The trees and the setting, it's just beautiful. But the day that we were there were echoing noises of artillery that was being fired off literally within hundreds of yards of us as we were meeting with some of the folks that survived the Nova Festival. The person in particular that we got a chance to be able to chat with and be able to pick her brain about what happens next was in one of the bomb shelters, because there was a launch of missiles coming at them, but then those bomb shelters became places where literally they were sitting ducks for the terrorists as they came in with gunfire. We traveled all the way to the north, had the opportunity to be able to visit with some of the mayors that are right along the border with Syria and with Lebanon, where whole towns are evacuated, whole towns, where people can't survive the onslaught of artillery coming at them constantly. We lose track of the fact that there are about 250,000 Israelis that are right now internally displaced as well, that live along the border with Gaza or live along the border with Lebanon or Syria. Those folks have also had to flee. Because while the world in the last several days has talked about 330 drone strikes, missile strikes, ballistics, and cruise missiles that have come at Israel from Iran directly, for some reason the world has lost track of the fact, not about the 330 bombs and missiles that have come at Israel in the last week, but the 12,000 rockets that have been fired at Israel since October the 7th. 12,000. 9,100 of those rockets have come in from Gaza, launching at civilians in Israel. 3,100 of those rockets have been launched from Lebanon, from Hezbollah, into the north of Israel, and 35 rockets have been fired from Syria at Israel. And I asked people, how many rockets would be fired at your house before you would respond in a way to be able to make it stop? Israel has had 12,000 fired at them since October the 7th. The United States was never, ever put up with that without responding in a forceful way to say we're going to make it stop. There's been a lot of conversation about Rafah. So I had a lot of conversations with Israeli leadership to be able to talk to them about the plan and what they're going to do. You see, there's Hamas brigades. Now, we think about terrorism often as just random terrorists that are gathering, but Hamas actually has a military structure with brigades that they've actually put together of fighting brigades. Most of those brigades have been broken up. The remaining brigades of Hamas terrorists are all living underground at Rafah.
Straighten the camera more.
While we need to do everything we can, and I had great conversations with Israelis about everything that they're doing to be able to protect civilians and to protect civilian lives that have nothing to do with this onslaught of terrorism. They're also keenly aware that the people that are living underground in Rafah are making public statements on social media that as soon as this war is over, they're coming again to do another October the 7th. And the Israelis are being very, very clear, we're not going to allow that to happen. We're not going to allow our Israeli citizens to be slaughtered in their beds early on a Saturday morning again. So they're doing everything they can to be able to prepare for that moment, to be able to stop the group of terrorists that are living underground. It's interesting to me when I think about the Hamas terrorist organization. In the United States, our military trains and prepares itself to get between violence and civilians. Hamas does the opposite. Hamas actually trains and equips to put civilians between its military and violence. They put the civilians on the top layer while the safe shelters underground are occupied by the terrorist armies. Stunning to me, just the mental difference between the two and how jarring that really is. Interesting conversations I had with some of the Israeli leadership as well, just to be able to chat with them and to say, you can't eliminate Hamas by trying to be able to attack them over and over and over again, to be able to eliminate all people that think like Hamas and that are actually a part of Hamas. And their response was interesting to me. Their response was, we fully understand we're not going to obliterate everyone that's in Hamas. We want to stop the threat that's coming at us, but we understand that there'll be members of Hamas in the future that will still think that way. And their response to me was, there are still Nazis in the world right now. There are still people that claim to be a Nazi or a neo-Nazi right now. But the difference is, they don't run Germany. And their first goal was, we want to end Hamas's rule, a terrorist organization having the capacity to run the entity right next door to us. We understand that there'll still be people that think like that, but we want to show them there is a better way. We still want to be able to have peace with our neighbors. You see, this connection between Hezbollah and Syria and Hamas is Iran's plan and has been for a long time to build what they're calling a ring of fire around Israel. It was their way of protecting themselves for the Iranian regime.
And we don't
that
have
if
to
they made it so violent
That's
around
why I
Israel,
like a
Israel would
little
never
bit of a
actually get
delay.
leadership in Israel, loan them bits of.
Because then I get to just scrub on through. We're almost all caught up. I have a feeling that we're going to get caught up and it's going to be... Come on, can we get a little...
Fortunately, they were
oh boy.
Two, and that the motion...
Who do we... Yeah, let's... Why not? Shall we? Don't want to scrub on past it.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the en bloc consideration of the following Senate resolutions: S-Res 645, S-Res 646.
Is there objection to proceeding on block?
Civil corporate elections.
Without objection, the
I
Senate
do
will
a
proceed
lot
on
of
block.
What, just anything.
I ask
comes
unanimous
my
consent
way.
that the resolutions be agreed
I
to,
have some really
preambles be
great
agreed to, and that the
tools.
motions to
My
reconsider be
Westlaw
considered made and laid upon the table,
subscription
all in block.
Is there
It's
objection?
got that good
Without objection.
AI.
Mr. President, I have 10
It really
requests
does,
for committees
too.
to meet during today's session of the Senate.
So
they have
you
the
know, an
approval of
older
the
lawyer
majority
might have to
and
find
minority leaders.
one
Duly
thing
noted.
to do. You know, that's
yield
their
the floor.
lane. With Westlaw's AI system, I can learn a lot very quickly, and it does, you know, good research. It's not like Google's Bard or ChatGPT get lawyers in trouble. You know, although I'm a coolie guy, so maybe can't rely too heavily on the AI. Michael Cohen ruined it for all of us. Mayorkas isn't here. They're talking about impeaching him, I believe. So the House delivered their impeachment articles today to the Senate. So they briefed the Senate on what they did with their impeachment, and now, you know, Senate's talking about taking it up. It's apparently tomorrow. They're going to be sworn in as jurors, and they're going to decide whether to impeach or not. Now, problem is that, you know, Democrats have the vote here, I believe, in the Senate. I don't know if that's clean
Senator from
majority,
Vermont.
or if there's a small
Mr.
independent
President,
coalition
as
that
most
gives
everybody
them
knows,
extra votes. But
Iran recently launched several
see.
hundred drones and missiles at Israel. Fortunately, there were no fatalities. This attack was Iran's response to an Israeli airstrike on their consulate in Damascus, Syria, on April 1st, an attack which killed 7 Iranian officials. I applaud President Biden for doing what he can to make sure that this conflict does not get out of hand,
What do they do to
does
this
not
man?
escalate, and does not create what would be a disastrous regional war. But while we pay attention to this developing Israeli-Iran
It's one of the
crisis,
things. Yeah, I
I hope very
definitely
much
dabble in the
that
civil.
we will not lose sight
It's probably
of the
the most
unprecedented humanitarian
largest
disaster
portion of my
now
practice
taking
right now.
place in Gaza. We must not lose sight of that disaster. As I'm sure all Americans know, the war in Gaza began on October 7th when Hamas, a terrorist organization, invaded Israel, killed some 1,200 innocent men, women, and children, and took over 230 people into captivity, many of whom are still being held. It has always been my view that Israel had a right
I have
to
not
defend
done
itself,
family
respond
yet, but I'm
to this attack,
definitely
and to go
eager
after
to learn
Hamas.
about family.
It is also my view
it's
that Israel does not
inescapable,
have the right
seems to be.
to go to war against the entire Palestinian people, which is exactly what the Netanyahu government is doing. Mr. President, let us take a deep breath and understand that what is happening right now in Gaza is horrendous, it is inhumane, and it is in gross violation of American and international law. It is driven by
I'm
extreme
asking you for your
right-wing
financial
Israeli
support. That was
government
a great
officials
one. That meme.
and a government
that old,
which is increasingly dominated by
that old
religious
meme.
fundamentalists. That is who is driving this humanitarian disaster in Gaza. And Mr. President, what should be most troubling to the American people
Sorry. Yeah, thank you
is
for your
that we,
service, Jeremy.
as Americans, are complicit because it is U.S. taxpayer dollars that have helped create this unprecedented humanitarian disaster. Mr. President, let me briefly describe what is going on in Gaza because it is so easy. In a world full of problems, media focuses on this, focuses on that, Congress
This is
focuses
just
on this
not
and that.
what
It is
we're-
so
this is
easy
the U.S.
to turn away
Congress we're talking
from the
about.
tragedy in Gaza.
Look,
These
sorry, scrubbing through Bernie.
President, but is
And I think that brings us current. That is the Senate
the motion to
floor.
proceed to calendar number 365 HR 7888.
Without objection.
Mr. President, for the information of the Senate, senators will be
Senator
sworn in as jurors
astronaut.
in the court of impeachment at 1 p.m. If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I move that it stand adjourned.
This wasn't a
under the previous
hearing.
order.
So the
question
big,
is on
the
the
big
motion.
thing that happened
All those
here.
in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed.
See if I can get this going. The big thing that happened today was that Representative Representative Green, I don't know, he came over to the Senate. He's on the House side of things. Came over to the Senate and said, "This is what we impeached Mayorkas for." And that was a big deal. And then some senators had something to say about that. Some senators had something to say, about other things. We saw stuff about, I think there was somebody who talked about the Ukraine, someone talked about Israel and Gaza and Iran. They talked about a few different things, but the main thing that was talked about was impeachment proceedings for Mayorkas, which are going to happen tomorrow. But everybody seems to think that the Senate majority is going to sweep it under the rug, or just who knows? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm interested. So hit that like and the subscribe button, the bell, so you know when I'm streaming tomorrow, because that'll be great if we can do this again. I'll have a lot of fun. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. Don't forget, knowledge is power. Subscribe for more. Be well. I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Blazers by Pierce Bespoke.